An aspect of character too often lacking in modern man is courage. And too often we also have the wrong idea of courage. More than a generation ago, H.G. Wells very ably defined what courage is. He said, "Brave men are men who do the things they are afraid to do." Courage is not foolhardiness. It is tackling a task that intimidates us, that we are often afraid to tackle, but doing it all the same. I recall back in the 30s a classmate of mine who was washed out of the Air Force precisely because he had no sense of fear. He was, they felt, a menace to others in the Air Force and to very valuable equipment. And so he was dropped. Courage can never be equated with folly or foolhardiness. It is doing the things we are afraid to do, and doing them because we have faith. Faith in the consequences. Faith in the God who governs us. Courage involves faith. No man risks anything for something he does not believe in. Less and less we are seeing courage in action in the American people. I am told that firepower has dropped steadily in each successive war since World War I, because less and less of the soldiers believe in what they are asked to fight for. There are good reasons for that. But it does indicate the necessity of believing in what we are called to do, and above all, having a faith in God. This is what makes men courageous. When men lose courage, they then believe in peace at any price. And of course, the best peace of all is in a graveyard. Nothing disturbs the dead. And the people who believe in peace at any price are people who are asking that the world be turned into a graveyard. But men who have courage, men of faith, recognize that the risk-free life is impossible, that life constantly involves risks, ventures, courage. Only so can we gain those things which are desirable in our life and in our culture. Psalm 27 verse 14 says, "Wait on the Lord and be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord." Courage involves an act of faith and a confidence that truth and justice shall prevail. Without that faith, no man will make a stand. Our problem today is that as individuals and as a country, we are no longer making a stand. And our failure to stand for anything, whether in things domestic or foreign, in things political or moral, is due to the absence of faith or weak faith that refuses to let go and to trust God. Years ago, when I was living for some years among the American Indians, I recall one fall going up into the mountains with a friend, an Indian, and as we were going to cross a stream, it was very, very cold, and I questioned whether the ice would support us. And he said, "With the 2 cold nights we have had, that ice will take us and our wagon." I could have said, "No, I believe you, but I'm not going to risk it." That would not have been faith. Faith meant putting my life on the line, stepping out on the ice in confidence that what I had been told was true. Now, God's word is truth, and we are summoned to step out in every area of life in confident faith. Courage is an act of faith.
Otto, I have heard you say that people who have physical courage are a dime a dozen, but that what's in really short supply today is moral courage.
Yes.
What do you mean?
Well, if people didn't have physical courage, there couldn't be war. My observation has been that the average man would rather die than be disgraced in front of his fellows. He will go to his death very bravely and not show cowardice before the officers or the other men. And in fact, in World War II, I was in all the naval theaters of war. I only saw 2 men in the whole period show fear openly. And yet, of course, there must have been some fear inside of almost everybody. And I find the same thing in peacetime, that people will go along at great expense to their career, at great expense to their family, great expense to the reality of a situation, rather than stand up in front of everyone else in the boardroom or in the corporation and say this is a stupid way to go. In fact, here in the United States right now, we're in the process of marching toward extinction because the press and our experts tell us that this is the way to peace.
As a historian, is this shortage of courage, moral courage that you see in this country here, is this something that's relatively new, or when possibly did it start, and what caused it?
Oh, I don't think it's relatively new. I think this has been the common lot of mankind from time immemorial. And I think that people move behind their leaders. World War II proved one thing to me. The average person will not fight to defend their country. France did not fight. Belgium did not fight. Holland did not fight. Sweden did not fight. Finland did not fight.
Well, Finland did fight.
Well, I'm sorry.
Sweden
Finland
and
did,
Norway.
but Sweden and Norway did not, because their leaders didn't lead them to fight. Mm-hmm. Left alone, mankind is a herd of sheep.
Rush, would you say that the recent visit to Washington, D.C. by Gorbachev, Mikhail Gorbachev of the Soviet Union, the way he was wined and dined and partied with President Reagan and our other government officials, does this have anything to do or say anything about the moral courage of our country and its leaders?
I think it does. I believe that we are more interested in peace primarily because we lack courage to face up to issues. Peace comes as a byproduct of other things. We don't get peace by going after peace primarily, but by going after those things that make for peace. And we have not been a peace-loving country in the sense that we have sought those things which will make for peace in the world. And moral righteousness is basic to true peace. Our Lord says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you. Not as the world giveth, give I unto you." In other words, the peace he gives is not the kind of peace the world seeks. The kind of peace men want is a graveyard peace, where nothing is happening. But the kind of peace we should have as a nation is a peace that comes from having resolved problems, having come to a resolution of moral crises on sound moral premises, and we're ducking moral issues rather than facing up to them. So it wasn't the meeting with Gorbachev that was bad, but it was the tenor of the meeting.
So as Bible-believing Christians, we would reject the idea that we can have peace through, say, military strength, which is what a lot of conservatives would say, that you just have peace by being militarily strong. That doesn't necessarily follow at all, does it?
No, it doesn't, because you can have a great deal of military strength, and if the people have no desire to fight, it's worthless. And the firepower of American troops has diminished steadily over the years because they do not feel there is anything worth fighting for. And as the country has been led, there is no reason to believe that we have anything to fight for as far as the leadership is concerned. It isn't that Americans do not love their country, but they do not love their leaders of either party. They do not trust them. They do not feel that they provide the leadership or anything worth dying for.
Joseph, what about in the business area? What is the status of moral courage as far as your average, typical American businessman is concerned?
Well, there has been a pickup in entrepreneurship in the last few years. You might say during the Reagan 80s, we have seen a revival somewhat of entrepreneurship. Many of the popular books today indicate that business is being put back on the front burner from being on the back burner, and there has been a new spirit of entrepreneurship taking place. However, it's a mixed kind of entrepreneurship because our society today, due to embracing the welfare state mentality, has put such a high value on cradle-to-grave security that we're even seeing a qualified form of entrepreneurship in the marketplace, whereas the older entrepreneurship was characterized by that willingness to take a total risk, to step out and with one's entire savings and invest it in that project, of course, having done the research and the necessary preliminary work, still be able to make that move to pick up one's family and go, put their home on the market, whatever, and step out and start that enterprise. Today, there is, even with the new entrepreneurship, we see a reticence to make the kind of full sacrifice that is essential to success. And I think because we're seeing a mixed form of entrepreneurship, the result is we're not seeing as many successes in the business realm as there could be.
All right, let me stop you there, because I asked you about moral courage, and you talked to me about entrepreneurship. Now, entrepreneurship just might be a fancy word for greed for a lot of people. The fact that people are for entrepreneurship doesn't necessarily mean they're morally courageous.
Well,
and if it doesn't, what is it, when you look at the average American businessman, do you see that's really lacking?
Well, first of all, I believe that that entrepreneurship is moral courage. True entrepreneurship is. Granted, there could be some greed mixed into it, but I don't know. I think the thing that motivates a man to step out and be an entrepreneur, certainly self-interest is at stake in that, but there's also a higher motivation that has to do with a sense of calling, a sense of destiny, and therefore a willingness to create that new enterprise, having it undergirded by that type of motivation. However, again, John, I feel that because of the spirit of our age, the zeitgeist that we're living in, there is this there is this insurance type society that we live in, where unless all our bases are covered, then we're going to be reluctant to pay the price that oftentimes needs to be paid in order for us to experience success. And to me, that all involves courage. It takes great courage to step out and start a new enterprise.
How about you, Victor? What do you think about when you hear the word courage?
Courage to what end? Courage to defend what you have, courage to extend what you would like to see. The difference between a homesteader and a city person, I think, are very different kinds of courage. Where does the strength, where does the will come from if you don't have a vision of what you would like to see? People lack a vision, perish. And we're in a time when, lacking a vision, there's no courage, or very, very little of it, or very, very selected for little tiny aspects of your life and a concern for the posterity of your family, your friends, and the nation, the homeland, the heritage of which we're a part. It's not there.
What are we to make of these businessmen, Otto, who made their fortunes here in this country, and when Gorbachev, head of the Soviet Union, comes over here, they seem to fall all over themselves to go to the Soviet embassy to wine and dine with Mr. Gorbachev and try to open new offices in the Soviet Union to sell all kinds of things to the Soviet Union, which they're going to use to basically try to murder us.
Well, there are businessmen and businessmen. We've got hundreds of thousands, several million businessmen. We have a sprinkling that went over and kissed Gorbachev's toe. We also have businessmen like Russell DeYoung, who refused President Johnson and Secretary of State Dean Rusk when they asked him to supply the technology for a synthetic rubber plant to Romania. He said he didn't think it was in the best interest of the United States and he wouldn't do it. And Johnson was very angry, and Rusk was very angry, and Raymond Firestone agreed to do it. And some conservatives went after Raymond, and Raymond backed off. And I ran into Russell at a convention in New York about a year or so later, and I said, whatever happened? Did Washington ever do anything to you for this? Well, he said, you know, it wasn't the smartest thing I ever did. I'm only one man representing one company. And he said our government business was not so big. It only amounted to about 15% of our gross revenues. But he said a very strange thing. He said every time I went back to Washington after that, they rolled out the red carpet. Well, I thought about it, and I thought, well, that fits. We've got a cowardly government. It bows down before every pressure group in the country. We have a series of weaklings in the presidential office, surrounded by even weaker individuals who call themselves a staff. Nixon had over 5,000 staff members, for instance, and I think this guy has over 6,000. But when we start talking about people, we really have to specify who we're talking about. Generally speaking, my experience with businessmen in larger corporations has been that the men in the senior suite, the executive suite, do not use bad language the way they do in the movies. They are civil and courteous with one another. They don't raise their voices. They have reasoned and rational discussions. They tell the truth. And telling the truth is a form of courage, because you go down to the middle of the tree, the fellow won't tell you the truth. You go down to the pool room, and they think telling the truth is a stupid thing to do. And yet, the truth and the ability to tell the truth is what distinguishes a brave man from a no man.
Well, it doesn't seem like we have a lot of truth-telling going on in this country. I'm asking questions about Gorbachev because I live near Washington, D.C., and this so-called summit is very much on my mind. And I thought it was very revealing that in a meeting with a group of media executives, when he was asked about human rights, Gorbachev waved his finger in the face of his questioner and asked the question, who is America to morally instruct my country about human rights? Who are you to morally teach us anything? And what was revealing about the response was basically that there was no response. Not only was there no response, but nobody else in the room asked any more questions about human rights. So, Rush, have we always been a country where such a question would go unanswered and where everyone around the table would be struck dumb?
No, emphatically not. I think the lack of courage among Americans is something relatively new. Americans historically have been an adventurous and a courageous people. However, having said that, I want to add this. I think we must beware of isolating virtue. Any one of the courage, any one of the virtues isolated from the others is worthless. A man may be very sincere and yet a murderer or a thief. A man may be courageous and he can be a Marxist or a fascist, and someone whose courage is not a virtue in a sense. It's a part of his evil. So that courage has to be a part of a broader picture. And the failure of courage in our country at this time is because this larger picture is lacking. As a people, we have lost faith, or we have a very weak faith. And therefore, lacking these other virtues, we cannot manifest courage, or if we do, it's a foolhardy thing. It is not worthwhile. It isn't virtuous courage.
I'm thinking about that. So you can't have true courage or real courage apart from religious faith.
You can have courage.
Otherwise, it's kind of it runs the risk of being sort of a macho kind of braggadocio.
Yes.
It's phony. It's fake.
Well,
and dangerous.
It's dangerous. That's the best answer. It can be real courage in some instances. I'm sure there are fascists and Marxists who are courageous men, but that doesn't make their courage a virtue. It has to be linked with other virtues to be worthwhile.
It strikes me that there's a promise in the Word of God that He would not give us a spirit of fear. But in fact, we look at this church today, and so many people are riddled with concerns, anxieties, discouragements. I mean, you almost hear this litany. It's a soap opera of pain coming out of a Christian mouth. And yet He says He promises us we would have a spirit of power, of love, and a sound mind, which is, to my mind, understanding, knowledge, and wisdom. Now, somehow, the Spirit of God is being either grieved, resisted, or quenched because of disobedience, and that Spirit's withdrawal from an active, full empowering in our lives means that we're captured by a spirit of fear, and that means no courage.
I couldn't agree with you more. I wish we could go on this particular topic, because it does seem that so many in the church today fear everything but God.
Very well said.
Yes.
Yes.